When we last left off in the series, we got through the insects leading up to the scaled or closed-winged insects that included our Lepidoptera and Trichoptera. Going way back in time to the early Jurassic, the wings of some of the earliest ancestors of both groups looked somewhat like this. They were clearly divided and covered in primitive hairs that are conserved in the caddisflies, and that became very scale-like in the Lepidopterans. This isn't the only change that occurred over time, however, and as you can see by this diagram, the separation of different Lepidopterans from their earliest ancestors occurred in the early Jurassic period. Now, remember that when we do taxonomic work, it's based mostly on conserved traits. In the past, before we had our molecular techniques, people would look at the morphology or embryology of some of these animals, and the ones that had close similarities in morphology and embryology were considered more closely related. Now, some of this still holds true. However, we now know that there is such a thing as analogous evolution, where different lines develop the same basic structure or function because they occupy the same niche in different environments, or the same niche in the same environment at different times. You don't normally do taxonomy on the basis of size, color, development time, food preference, breeding behavior, and other factors that are mostly features of the natural history, particularly at these higher levels. When you get to the genus and species level, yes, you may rely on some of these features to distinguish different ones. However, you wouldn't put every green animal in the same order or family just because they're green. You wouldn't put every animal that eats birch leaves in the same order just because they eat birch leaves. These are not the best ways of going about classifying things. They are more subject to selection than features that are highly conserved. As we will see in the Lepidoptera, there are several features that are highly conserved that don't have any clear selective advantage and basically arose from an early mutation that just got carried down the line. Sometimes when we're describing large genera or large families with many subfamilies or subgroupings, formal or informal, we will make our groupings based upon things such as size or ecological niche to make things easier for us. Again, however, these occur at the much lower ranks of taxonomy, not up at the order or family levels. Now, we will get into these splittings very soon. So basically, we have our Lepidoptera with four main suborders. We have the Heterobathminia, the Glossata, the Glossata, and the Zoogloptera. Now, the majority of Lepidopterans belong to the Glossata. This is the group of Lepidopterans that contains the Lepidopterans with proboscises, which is the stereotypical Lepidopteran mouthpart. The Aglossata, Heterobathmina, and Zoogloptera, by the way, these used to all be grouped as one. The molecular evidence has split them, but they used to all be grouped as one because they don't have the mouthparts of the Glossata. They either have no mouthparts or they have very mandibular, caddisfly-like mouthparts, since they are the most primitive lineages. The Heterobathmina is the smallest, well, the second smallest of these three small groups of Lepidopterans. It only has about 10 or 11 species that we have discovered, and it has a single family with 2 genera, I believe, and it is confined to South America and is very understudied. Meanwhile, the Aglossata has just one superfamily, Agathophagoidea, which has the single family Agathophagidae, which has the genus Agathophagia, which has just 2 species found in the South Pacific. As you can see, you have Oidea indicating a superfamily, and then a family, and then finally your genus and your two species. Notice how these species are in italics. Now, as far as the Zoogloptera go, you have a single superfamily, the Micropterygoidea, which has just one family, the Micropterygoideae, which itself has just about 20 genera and maybe 100 species. This is the accepted lineage of that group. Again, there are several extinct groups, some of which are not listed here, and the majority of Lepidopterans belong to the classification Glossata. We will go deeper into the further divisions of the Glossata later on. But as you can see, our more primitive lep groups, such as the Glossata and the Zoogloptera, are very basal. They're typically microleps. And again, I will reiterate that micro and macro Lepidoptera are not formal taxonomic classifications. If they were, they would have to be very high up. But in fact, you have things that would classify as Microlepidopteran and things that classify as Macrolepidopteran, even within the same family as you go down the line. So, for all intents and purposes, these primitive moths are mostly micromoths. They generally feed on the same thing their entire adult lives. If they feed at all as adults, the larvae may feed on a different part of the same plant as the adult. And since these species don't have tongues, they don't require a liquid diet, and they oftentimes feed on pollen or even the leaf tissues, whereas their larvae are borers or minors. Again, this is not the distinguishing feature, as this is just a natural history trait. But these primitive micromoths are vastly unknown. As you can see, they have a whole lot of fringe around the wings. Some of the very small moths exhibit this, since this is very easy to catch the air with because of how small they are. But the majority of Lepidopterans have wing scales. And we finally get to our Glossata. This contains, again, the vast majority of described Lepidopterans. Our next video will focus upon this classification known as the Detricia, which is, as you can see, a huge subset. Just a quick reminder that whether you're Detrician or non-Detrician is first dependent on whether or not you are in the suborder Glossata. This only applies to the Glossata. Technically, when we get into what makes you a Detrician versus a non-Detrician Lepidopteran, everybody in the other suborders would have the non-Detrician feature, but they're not considered non-Detrician because you have to be in the suborder Glossata to be considered Detrician or non-Detrician. And we will get into that in the next video. It's a really interesting distinction. It's basically a conserved trait, and I don't really know why it's a conserved trait. It must have just been something that happened and got passed down. It doesn't, to me, have a clear advantage, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. You'll have to stay tuned. But you can see we have a huge diversity of leps, and we are going to get into these different superfamilies as time goes on. So stay tuned.